Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome all of you to the WSDS thematic session, uh, the relevance of the energy efficiency first principle in an Indian context. And may I kindly request everyone present in the audience to please keep their mobile phones on silent. Before we commence with the session, I would like to make a brief safety announcement. In case of any untoward incident like fire, please use the nearest exit gate, which is at the side of this hall. My name is Riya Mohal, and we would now begin with the session. And now I would like to introduce the moderators as well as the panelists of the session. Our co-moderators are Mr. Ajay Shankar from TERI and Mr. Edwin Kukuk from the EU delegation to India. And our panelists are Mr. Chirag Gajjar from PwC India, Ms. Cornelia Schenk from IEA, Ms. Shabnam Basi from Griha Council, Dr. Winfrey Dam from GIZ, Mr. Arijit Sengupta from Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power. And we are joined virtually by Ms. Namita Vikas, founder of Optus ESG. And she's joining the panel discussion virtually. And I thank all the panelists actually for making it out here, and also to the audience present. Now we will begin with the session, and I would like to invite Mr. Arupendranath Malik from TERI for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Ria, and a very good afternoon to all of you, and greetings from the entire TEDI family. This year, the summit series completes 2 decades of institutionalization, and this is has emerged as the only track to event of this scale, which is hosted in a developing country. Inaugurating the summit, Honorable Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, emphasized the role that India today is playing and has emerged as a global leader to provide solutions to global problems, and also the importance of collective action, both of which are integral part of the overall theme of this year's summit. And what best can follow? We have today a set of diverse global thought leaders, policymakers, and practitioners with us who are walking the talk in the space of sustainability and importantly growth. We welcome all of you to this session themed the relevance of the energy efficiency first principle in an Indian context. The session today shall delve into 3 important points. Point number 1, to identify how the energy efficiency first principle can be adopted in the Indian context, and what are the added value and the benefits that comes with it. Point number 2, to understand the best practices of energy efficiency first principle in EU member states in across various sectors, and the panel will also deliberate on how do we develop a robust action plan. And number 3, to identify priority sectors where energy efficiency as a first principle can be integrated, can be implemented. We are proud to have a distinguished panel with us today, and we look forward to an engaging session. And I don't want to stand between all of you and the panel. Look forward to an engaging session. I hand over to Ria.
Thank you for your opening remarks, Arup sir. Now, Mr. Chirag Gajjar from PwC will be sharing a presentation on the energy efficiency first principle.
Can we have the presentation of this? Okay, while the presentation is coming up,
Thank you so much, Terry, the organizers for WSTS, as well as other partners. Thank you so much to EU for partnering with PwC India, uh, and also my distinguished panelists. So PwC India is working with the EU delegation in India on implementing the Clean Energy and Climate Partnership. And as part of this particular project, we've also worked on several activities. This is what I'm going to present about is one such report that we've looked into, the energy efficiency first principle. So very quickly, let me just start by saying that, as part of the European Green Deal that was proposed in 2019, the Commission presented an EU strategy for energy system integration. Now, the energy system integration is something that is facilitated by other eight legal acts of the clean energy for all European packages. And as part of this particular packages, energy efficiency is the core of the strategy, where energy savings initiatives will always be the first step to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, the European Commission further proposed a clearer priority for the energy efficiency first principle in the recast of Energy Efficiency Directive that was adopted in July in 2021. And it was also accompanied by a formal recommendation to the EU countries on the issue and detailed guidelines on its application adopted, which was adopted in September 2021. So the guidelines and regulation basically define what the energy efficiency first principle is. I'm not going to read out what the definition is, but in a nutshell, the E first principle basically aims at removing existing market and regulatory barriers to energy efficiency to ensure that the demand side resources can compete on a equal footing with supply side ones. It also lays the foundation for good infrastructure planning in support for the energy transition as well. To this end, E first principle basically acts as a horizontal guiding principle across principle of the EU's climate as well as energy governance that establishes that only the energy needed is produced and investment in standard assets are to be avoided in the path of achieving the climate goals. This is what the label one of the three levels of EU's strategy for energy system integration basically signifies. Now, to this end, under the CECP partnership, we undertook a step to understand first what is energy efficiency first principle. Second, understanding the requirement on the regulatory framework through the review of policy approaches that are adopted by EU member states. And third, assessing the potential for sectors in India that can sort of be ready for the energy efficiency first principle implementation or integration. And lastly, exploring what possible strategies for integrating EE first principle in Indian context for these particular sectors that we have sort of looked into. Very quickly, we followed this particular 7-step approach, which focuses on methods of integrating the energy efficiency first principle in various sectors across the EU member states within the regulatory and policy framework that is available. For example, the sectors included building sector, power, district heating, and use energy efficiency, etc., etc. As part of the study, we further assessed what policy approach in the EU have been adopted, in the EU member states have been adopted for integrating this particular. For example, let's say the building sector. The main legislation for the building sector is Energy Performance of Building Directive. Within this directive, there are several provisions for considering E first principle, for example, minimum energy performance standards and calculating the energy performance of buildings. At the same time, it also broadly aligns with the climate goals under the Paris Agreement. And there could also be, when we sort of looked at some of the member states, we also observed there could be difference of implementation depending upon the context of different states as well. We further looked at several sectors in India and subsectors in India, including, for example, power, transportation, buildings, residential buildings, industry, and so on and so forth. And we identified what are the programs or schemes that are already in place with regards to the energy efficiency which are available. This slide basically provides a snapshot of such initiatives and schemes. After that, what we did, for example, we took one sector at a time. We identified what could be the potential strategies. So here's an example of a building assessment that we did for the residential building sectors. Some of the areas of intervention that were identified as part of the residential sector could were looked at, like, for example, reducing end user demand, using decentralized renewable energy production and storage, optimizing energy efficiency, and optimizing overall performance. Some of the possible strategies that we looked at are including, making financing available for renovation programs that could be implemented in residential buildings, increasing the energy efficiency of the residential end use as well, reinforcing the technologies in buildings, for example, circularity, and developing some of the standards that include some of these technologies as well, and so on and so forth. Further, we also looked at that, there are certain schemes like Vikuniva Samhita star-rated appliances, which are also operational, which encourage the use of energy efficiency, appliances in the residential purposes. We also looked at, for example, cooling demand. Going forward, the cooling demand in India is going to increase a lot. So there's also an India cooling action plan available. However, there could be additional consideration that needs to be looked at within the context of residential building, which is like, how do we harmonize the ENS as well as the India Cooling Action Plan, and sort of look at how energy efficiency first principle could be adopted in such harmonization activities. What are the alternatives available to ensure that there is a low carbon cooling also implemented within the residential sectors as well? So there are several sectors that we also looked at as part of this particular study, and all the sectors are available in details in the report. Moving on, in terms of, when we sort of finalized or concluded this study, we realized that identifying specific policy targets would be a key starting point within a particular policy environment, so that you're able to set specific key performance indicators. Identifying the barriers to energy efficiency would be a useful area of assessment as well, to understand where the EE first principle could make an entry within the existing policy and regulatory framework. Also, integration of the EE first principle as well, and what are the opportunities to incentivize the EE first principle within those particular sectors as well. The other thing that we noted was that there is a comprehensive assessment of the impacts of such policies is also required. So it would be helpful to define what kind of policy decisions have impact on the energy consumption as well as on the energy supply within this particular sectors. What are the methodologies of impact estimation? A conversation around that would be very helpful. For example, in EU, calculating and operating the multiple benefits of energy efficiency in Europe is being used. What kind of Indian version of methodology would be required to estimate this kind of impacts? And lastly, how the impacts should be analyzed in terms of the societal impacts such as health and human well-being, environmental impacts such as reduction in carbon emissions as well as air quality improvement, and economic impacts, which basically links to the energy security, economic independence, employment, and so on and so forth. So I will leave you with this particular thoughts, and I'll hand it over back to Priya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chirag Gajjar, for the presentation. I would now like Mr. Edwin Kukuk and Mr. Ajay Shankar to set the context for the session.
Okay. Thank you very much, and many thanks to all the speakers and the panelists. I think we have an excellent panel to discuss the energy efficiency first principle. The report that Chirag was discussing is a report that a study that they are doing under the EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, which is a partnership that we agreed already in 2016 to work together with the government of India on energy efficiency, renewable energy, including solar and offshore wind, but also to work on the grid, to have a grid that enables a much higher share of renewable energy, and also on sustainable finance and mitigation in other sectors, and also climate resilience and adaptation. As Chirag rightly explained, in the EU, we have the European Green Deal, which tries to look at all these sectors in a holistic way and tries to ensure that the greenhouse gas emissions are reduced and that we become climate neutral by 2050, but also that we address the biodiversity crisis and air, water, and soil pollution, and also that we want to avoid negative social impacts of this green transition. So we also look into how can we include everybody in this transition and leave no one behind. As he also rightly explained, our focus is first to reduce the energy demand, energy savings, and actually this has even become more important and relevant because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Because of this, we ended up in an energy crisis in Europe, and we had to accelerate our green energy transition. We came up with a new proposal, which is called Repower EU, which again focuses on energy savings. And the energy savings in Europe has been enormously in the last winter because of the very high prices. So it's not necessarily something positive socially, but there have been enormous energy savings. We are now also increasing our move towards renewable energy, to solar, wind, including offshore wind, and also green hydrogen. And also we are diversifying our supply chain. So where we bought almost 50% of our gas from Russia, now we are buying gas and LNG from other parts of the world, and we are almost independent from Russian gas. So this energy first principle, it means taking utmost account of cost-effective, efficient energy efficiency measures. When you shape policies, so when you shape policies that can have an impact on energy demand, it means you always think, how do we do this in a way that we can reduce this energy demand, and also in our investment decisions. So when you take investment decisions, the idea is that you think when investing in something, how can we do this in a way that we can reduce the energy demand? So only the aim is to only use energy if only needed. The idea is to avoid that you invest in stranded assets, and the idea is that you also do this in a cost-effective way. And we do that for climate reasons, the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and we become climate neutral by 2050. And we do that for energy security. And I believe for the government of India, those two objectives are also very important. And the Honorable Prime Minister of India has mentioned that India should become energy independent by 2047 and climate neutral or net zero by 2070. So to be frank, also in Europe, this energy efficiency is often underestimated in our planning and also in our investment programs. So we also need to learn how we put this more up front. So that's why we created this principle with also an old document with guidance on how you can do that. And the idea was to assess whether this same principle would also make sense in an Indian context. What are the barriers in an Indian context, and what would be possible solutions? So we will have several questions to the panelists, but the main question is this: how to promote energy efficiency in the Indian policies and in the Indian investment decisions. After we have answered the question, does this make sense, this principle, in the Indian context? Over to you, Tajay.
Thank you. I was delighted to hear that thanks to Ukraine, Europe is moving more vigorously towards green energy, renewable energy efficiency. To some of us individually, it would be great news if net zero goal was brought forward to 2045 or 40 or 35, zero electricity or something like that. So that's a personal wish and hope, because it makes such a difference in the whole world, you being so large and so important. In the Indian context, I think we I think we are fortunate and a little ahead of the curve in embracing energy efficiency as a goal pretty early on. And I think we have achieved more success than I thought we would. But there is an enormous need and potential. Because if one looks at the global situation, then our per capita energy consumption to reach EU levels will become 4-5 times. Surely that's not desirable from a global perspective. And even if we move very aggressively towards renewables, energy efficiency will still be very important for us as well as for the rest of the world. But when I look at energy efficiency in our own experience, then the issue the thing which struck us early on was this business of information asymmetry or lack of information, and therefore the corresponding market failure. Because if energy efficiency made good economics, consumers in the marketplace were not taking the right decisions because they didn't see the life cycle, per unit consumption costs, and traded it against slightly higher capital cost. So in some segments in India, we've been very successful there. And the other success we've had is that volumes have enabled the supply side to move down the cost curve in a very dramatic manner, which we had not expected. But from a policy side, there is also the case of where policy should nudge forward movement so that, again, the business case for energy efficiency stands on its own after some time, or there is enough movement down the cost curve. So we are beginning to see a bit of that in the EV space. So the EV space in India is suddenly being occupied at a speed which I had not expected. And 3 years back, and hardly anybody would have expected that. And it has been created by policy instruments of government, including some tax concessions. But we may soon be reaching a point that the commercial case for EVs would stand without the tax concessions. And then we have also discovered that EVs are a great breakthrough in terms of energy efficiency. Take the total view, they're far more energy efficient. So the case for EVs is not being made either in India or globally in terms of energy efficiency with the strength that it needs to be made. But within India, I think the space where we need to achieve initial success and then breakthroughs in energy efficiency are very large. It's a very wide canvas. And the biggest one is cooling, which was referred to presentation. And there we have to get our act together. I think it's our biggest challenge in the field of energy efficiency in the short run. And then there are many other spaces which I hope some other panels brought into too. Because again, in terms of cooling, I would be delighted if a builder advertised a building saying, this is energy efficient, this is the extreme spirit. Everybody's advertising in India buildings for golf courses. We don't think golf, we don't have the greens, but golf is great marketing in terms of new developments. So I look forward to the panel discussion, and I think it's just the right balance of the EU and the Indian panel. So maybe request Mr. Chirag Gajjar to.
Thank you to the co-moderators, Mr. Edwin and Ajay Shankar sir,
Sir Arjit
For-
Sen Gupta.
for setting the context. As rightly pointed out by Mr. Shankar, Mr. Arjit Sen Gupta from Bureau of Energy Efficiency will be sharing his special remarks on the session.
Thank you very much. Ajay Shankar Saab, Edwin Kofu, Cornelia, Winfried, Chirag, Sundram. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank WSDS for inviting the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and sharing our views. So as we are aware, India is the third largest energy consuming country in the world as of now. And when we talk about energy consumption, our energy consumption is almost around 600 million tons of oil equivalent as per the latest energy statistics publication of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. And if we look However, so our energy consumption has been increasing year on year for the last 10 to 20 years. But if you look at the energy intensity, that is the energy consumption per unit of GDP, that has been decreasing at a steady rate of around 2 to 3% almost every year. That shows that energy efficiency has also played its role in, as Edwin was mentioning, about reducing the demand. So although as we are being a growing economy, our demand is bound to increase, but not at the pace as it would have otherwise if we would not have implemented energy efficiency measures. And I think the success of energy efficiency lies in the Energy Conservation Act, which was enacted in 2001. And subsequently, as Ajay sir has also mentioned about the success of energy efficiency. So we have seen huge success in so far as the labeling, appliance labeling scheme is concerned. So this behavioral shift that has happened, so that has been enormous. I will just take one example. So we launched this program of inverter air conditioners in 2015 into the 2015 on a voluntary basis, and it was made mandatory in 2018. And if we see into the figures up to 21, 22, so almost 70% of the sales of the air conditioner sales are happening for the inverter air conditioners. So although the price of inverter air conditioners are slightly higher than the traditional ones. So this shows that yes, we have been able to make the consumers change their behaviors towards more energy efficient appliances. The same has also happened in case of industries. So when we talk about our very successful perform achievement trade scheme, wherein we have been able to save almost 21 million tons of oil equivalent as on 2021-2022. So which is in fact more than the total energy consumption of a country like Sri Lanka. That is the amount of savings that we have been able to achieve. We have increased the bandwidth, not only the number of sectors, which we started with 8 sectors. Now, as part of the perform achievement trade scheme, we are covering 14 sectors. Similarly, we've been able to also add to the number of energy intensive units which are covered under the ambit of the scheme. So we started with 600 units. Now we have around 1200 units which are under the coverage. And the scheme is, of course, running quite smoothly. So these are the two areas I would highlight where we have made significant achievements. And other areas, of course, the lighting, the Ujala program, which was run so successfully by the Energy Efficiency Services Limited. And as of now, apart from the Ujala scheme, wherein around 35 crore LED bulbs were distributed, it has led to a market transformation, which in addition to the 35 crore or 350 million bulbs which were distributed under Ujala program, 1.6 billion bulbs would be distributed to the private market as well. So that is another example of how successfully that scheme was implemented and towards to promote the efficient use of energy and its conservation. Now, these 3 schemes that I spoke about, they have contributed significantly to India achieving around 240 billion units of electricity savings every year as per our latest report. And we are also been able to save around 270 million tons of CO2 emission reduction because of this, mainly of these 3 efforts. Of course, there are other schemes like the building energy efficiency, MSCB, which have also contributed, but these are the 3, I would say, the major schemes: the lighting program, the standards and labeling program, and the industry energy efficiency program, which have contributed significantly to the energy efficiency. Now, going ahead, we are all aware about the Glasgow commitments that Honorable Prime Minister made. So we are talking about reducing our emission intensity by 45%. Beyond what we have initially pledged in 2015 of reducing it by 33 to 35%. In fact, we are probably one of the few countries in the world who have been able to deliver what we have committed earlier. And also, if we look at our other commitment, that is net zero by 2070. So going ahead, I think the two sectors that would play a key role is the industry decarbonization is now one of them. Because unless and until you are able to decarbonize the industry, it would be very difficult for a country like us to achieve our net zero commitments. And secondly, as we also mentioned about the energy independence. I will close my remark as of now by mentioning that we also have made a huge commitment insofar as renewable energy is concerned. So our target of adding renewable energy capacity is 500 gigawatt by 2030. Now, if we look into that target, without energy efficiency, it will be very difficult for a country like us to sustain that kind of huge renewable energy capacity which we are talking about adding. So if we talk about renewable energy and storage, so energy efficiency has to be the first thing that has to be implemented. So which can in turn promote and make this renewable energy capacity addition along with storage sustainable in the long term for India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sen Gupta, for highlighting some of the initiatives India has taken on this front. We will now begin with the panel discussion.
The first question would be to Mrs. Namita Frikas, founder and managing director of Actus ESG LLP, who are with us. Mrs. Frikas.
Hi, Edwin, I can't hear you.
Can you
Yes.
hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. So once again, a warm welcome to you. The question to you would be, what challenges do infrastructure investment trusts face while integrating ESG into their decision making? And so the idea would be to talk about investments also in sectors that are perhaps normally less strongly related to energy efficiency. So because that's the idea, that we also mainstream and integrate it in other sectors. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you very much to TERI to invite me here. I think from a broader perspective, to me, there are four immediate challenges. And the first being, from a systemic lens, lack of an agreed definition of green or ESG in many markets serves as a hindrance, making it very difficult to exactly integrate these parameters into credit decision making, or even for that matter, garner investor interest. So, we've seen that despite a taxonomy regulation in Europe and ASEAN fulfilling such investor requirements, there is currently a ESG fund crackdown that's happening, and investments are being pulled out of less or non-compliant ESG funds. Therefore, I think, standardization, clarity from regulators, monitoring and accurate disclosures are key to propelling actions within the regions, especially developing markets. And I think second challenge, particularly if you look at InvITs, I think this is around accessibility of quality ESG data and tools for integration in risk and valuation frameworks. So, as it is at one level, InvITs struggle with ESG or climate-related risk perceptions in projects. And these could be across, not just limited to energy efficiency. And further, the lack of reliable data prevents them from being able to assess or analyze particularly the ESG factors and the opportunities. So, for instance, data authenticity, quality, timeliness, or granularity, these often impede prompt detection of vulnerabilities in capital-intensive projects like roads, bridges, buildings, utilities. I mean, all that Chirag covered as a part of the presentation. So the question really is how to do the integration in these cases. And if you look at one level, mandatory corporate disclosures provide limited information on ESG-related risks and opportunities, while voluntary disclosures are often unverified and non-standardized. And there could be cases then of divulging data or exaggerating information as it suits reporting entities, or at times even downplay or not disclose what doesn't really reflect well. And then to add to all of this, the annual cycle of ESG related disclosures and regular financial statements that are released, they don't match. I mean, they could be at different timings annually. So that also makes integration so much more harder. And I think, if you look at it from a structural challenge standpoint, ESG analysis often takes the form of qualitative input that is used alongside traditional quantitative models, since it's very difficult to assign a monetary value to ESG issues. So lack of algorithms and set formulas to quantify these risks makes integration of uphill task, which without a regulatory mandate is nobody's priority really. And then on top of that are ESG integration cost implications for investors, which are often passed on to borrowers, making the deals expensive or uncompetitive. I think, the last and the bigger point that I want to make here is that there is limited technical capacity to capture multifaceted and interdependent challenges linked to ESG, especially in developing economies. And that hinders integration, risk assessment, spotting the opportunities, and also channelizing capital in that direction. So, while we are seeing ESG hiring, it may be on the rise, but where is the pipeline of relevant skill sets and capacities? I mean, I think that's a very rare commodity or a resource, right? So in all, I would say that in the modern investment system of today, financial institutions are becoming aware of ESG as a part of their fiduciary duty. So as financing vehicles like InvITs gain traction amid emerging responsible investment regulations, availability, consistency, and quality of ESG information, I think they too would be incentivized in a way to move towards an integrated approach over the next few years, hopefully soon. Thank you. Over to you, Edwin.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, I forgot to give a time limit because we more or less have 4 minutes per answer, but you stick perfectly within the time limit. And thank you for pointing out the importance for taxonomy, the lack of reliable data, to have a methodology on how to quantify, and also the cost application and mandatory versus voluntary. So that was very relevant, I think. I would now like to follow the order on this table and go to Dr. Winfried Dam from GIZ. And my question to you would be about the work of GIZ. You were one of the first organizations to look at energy efficiency across sectors and also finance such initiatives across sectors. And the question would be, in this context, what learnings can support energy efficiency first principle across sectors?
Well, thanks for the flower. But I think we're only helping India to fulfill its own goals. I have to thank Antje Berger with us from the German embassy and the ICI initiative behind and the German Ministry of supporting us and giving us the opportunities and funding opportunities. Is it energy efficiency? Probably let's come back to January. We had already a peak demand of 211 gigawatt. Last year, we had about 192. So within 1 year, we increased the electricity demand in this country by more than 10% or 20 gigawatt. No cooling has been started yet. So if you add cooling, we might get across 230 gigawatt. And at that point in time, India right now has some issues of fulfilling that demand. So we might, hopefully I'm wrong, we might get back into load shedding as we experienced last April and May. We can avoid it if energy efficiency would be dealt as being first and would get its due focus. Then we could say, well, we need to do more on buildings. Yes, these kind of buildings are not suited for a lot of cooling devices, and you are aware that about only 10% of the apartments and houses in India have an AC yet. If you would go to Chinese level, in those appropriate areas, you are up to 90%. guess and calculate how much electricity demand would be there if you would apply the very same technology. We can come and say, well, where are the main energy guzzler? Of course, it's industry. So where's the incentive to do even more? Ajit and Gupta nicely pointed out the success of PET. Yes. And to the other extent, no, it's not sufficient. It's never sufficient because the increase is far too fast and too strong. But is it really energy efficiency first? Well, Germany is claiming that, the EU is claiming it. But if you look into the future, I would say the issue is CO2 emissions. So let's think about, and I can happily to explore why CO2 is an important thing and not energy efficiency as such. So if you like to avoid CO2 emissions, there's so many instruments around. The best one, being an economist, is the market. Put a price to it. Come up with a CO2 emission trading. And I'm glad that we has now been empowered to come along and ahead. And I'm looking forward that India will come up with that specific scheme, hopefully soon. In Europe right now, CO2 becomes very pricey. It's about around 80 euro a ton. That's a significant sum. Yes, and it developed over decades. So it's not a thing you switch on overnight because adjustment in industry and consumers are significant, but it's an approach to go. The next step, Germany and Europe is really committed to phase out and come to net zero, and it's in the law. So policy is set up that each sector has its CO2 goals. And we are right now struggling also in Germany that a few sectors like transport is not up to the mark. So they're really forced to come up with new suggestions to reduce CO2 emissions. And then it's up to the sector and the market. Is it, and Mr. Shankar, you nicely pointed out, is it energy efficiency and makes the existing cars or new cars more energy efficient? Or is it better to jump the technology and come up with e-vehicles? And if an e-vehicle is powered by solar, do I care whether you're going 80 kilometers, 120 kilometers, or unlimited on German highways? Not really, because it's a sustainable fuel. And then I don't care too much about energy efficiency in an e-car. The main point coming up in the future is demand shift. Yes, we have to reduce the energy consumption, but even more important, we have to avoid electricity demand outside solar times. And any technology which enable sectors to get into those electricity demand into solar times would be beneficial. If you use it outside solar times, you have an issue and you have to do something about it. You can do it regulatory wise. I'm economist, believe in markets, so put a price to it. And then of course, if you really want to cool down your apartment at 10 p.m., you have to pay for it. But if you're smart enough and go for district cooling, and you have a thermal storage being cooled down during daytime with solar, you're happy to cool down your apartment at 10 p.m. as well. And it will be fairly cheap. So I'm happy that we are in close discussion with B on a new policy on district cooling. So these are some of the initiatives and thinking I just wanted to share for this panel. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Also for sort of saying that perhaps the focus should not be on energy efficiency first, but on CO2 emission reduction. and the demand shift, and also for pointing out the importance of putting a price on CO2 emissions. I would like to go now to Ms. Cornelia Schenk, who is the Energy Efficiency Policy Analyst of the International Energy Agency. And actually recently the IEA came with an important report, the Energy Efficiency 2022 report. And the question would be, what findings did the report reveal, and what opportunities does energy efficiency hold in India?
Thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you very much to TERI for the kind invitation to this panel and this very important conference. In the Energy Efficiency Market Report, we take a look back at the last 12 months of energy efficiency development globally. And we actually raised the question in this report whether 2022 marks a turning point in energy efficiency. We see a lot of trends that give hope, that give a positive outlook. So we saw, for instance, energy efficiency at the center of global political agendas, fueled by the current energy crisis, and at the center of concerns to meet energy affordability, energy security, and also climate goals. We see a substantial increase in mobilizing financing. So energy efficiency related investments have been up by about 16%. We estimate around 560 billion globally in 2022. And we also see a large number, more than 550 billion mobilized in terms of short-term crisis response measures, which is positive. How will this be sustained? We also see energy intensity improvements globally at about 2% in 2022, which is 4 times more than in the last 2 years, but it still falls short of the 4% energy intensity improvements that we need to reach a net zero emissions pathway. We also see a lot of awareness raising and behavior change campaigns globally being launched. We see strong advances in digitalization to make the grid smarter, to enable the use of renewables, and also demand response. And we see strong progress in key technology sectors like heat pumps and also electric vehicles, which have also been mentioned for the Indian context here. But we also see challenges like energy and supply chain pressures. We see rising energy prices, high interest rates, which make the cost of financing higher. We see new broad-based fuel subsidies and direct cash payments to end users to buffer the effects of the crisis, which can have a distorting effect on the market and not be sustainable in the long run. And the key point for us will be how governments move forward with the implementation and with following through on their ambitions and on their policies. So actions, one takeaway for us is that actions in the short and in the long run have to be based on several pillars. One is efficiency, and in all our modeling, energy efficiency is front-loaded, so it should come first to make the energy transition more cost effective and more feasible in the long run. But also we need electrification and decarbonization as central pillars of a clean energy transition. Why is it relevant for India? India will see stronger energy demand growth than any other economy over the coming decades. And our analysis shows that more than in any other major economy, India's energy future depends on the buildings and facilities yet to be built and on the vehicles and appliances yet to be bought. So taking energy efficiency into account in planning for the future and designing the right building policy and regulatory environments is very key to mitigate the energy demand growth that India will see over the coming decades. And as we have seen in the first presentation, India already put in place a big number of policies and programs and initiatives to improve energy efficiency, and has right now about 10% lower energy intensity than the G20 average on an economy basis, which is a good achievement. But just the sheer size of development for India means that energy efficiency has to be at the center and at the start of a lot of policy actions. And we also see that energy efficiency gains, the biggest gains, can be achieved with comprehensive policy packages that address the regulatory side, but also information and awareness raising and capacity building measures, and also incentives. So there is a comprehensive approach needed. The big sectors are very well known to us. Industry is one of the big end use, or the biggest end use sector in industry. There is a lot to talk about decarbonizing industry. Some of the potentials for energy efficiency and material efficiency are often overlooked, and they can deliver the biggest savings in over the next decades to 2030 and a little beyond, while other mitigation technologies come into play on a longer time frame up to 2050. The same can be said for buildings. It is very important when we look at analysis and outlooks that about 2/3 of the building stock that will be existing in India in 2040 are yet to be built. So our building codes have to factor in energy efficiency. They have to be rolled out and taking efficiency of the building itself and the envelope into account. Thereafter, looking at the efficiency of appliances and applying this needed electricity demand with renewable energy. And in the transport sector as well, we have heard the great success story of vehicle electrification. India has made great progress on vehicle electrification, but we should also consider that in road transport, for instance, trucks, so trade is taking about 45% of CO2 emissions, and for specific vehicle categories like trucks, electrification is only in its infancy. So the continued reliance on fuel economy standards on improving the efficiency of the vehicles that are on the road continue with great relevance. Electrification is one of the great pillars that we need for a clean energy transition. But energy efficiency is cheapest and the cleanest source of electricity, and therefore should be front-loaded. But we also need electrification and urbanization moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, again, very rich contribution. And perhaps I should say we will be writing a very detailed report so that all these valuable messages are captured and shared with you. Two messages I want to take out. So you were clearly saying that we are falling short of the 4% energy efficiency reduction that is needed to meet the climate neutrality by 2015. And you're also saying what makes India so special is that India is really about the buildings, the infrastructure yet to be built, and also the appliances, cars yet to be bought. So that makes India different from many other countries in the world. I would like to go to Mr. Chirag Gajjar, who is implementing the Clean Energy and Climate Partnership and who did this study. And my question to you would be, from your study, which sectors and applications best represent the case for incorporating the energy efficiency first phase?
Yeah, thank you so much, Edwin, for that question. And I mean, I've heard everyone, and the clear answer in front of us is that the building sector is definitely up and coming in India, which needs to have a deeper look. There are many other sectors that we've looked at as part of the study, including transport, industry, power sector as well, market sector as well. So some of the sectors that we've looked at, what we've looked at is that how the current status of different schemes and policies exist in India, and what are the opportunities that are available in these particular sectors. Let me continue with the example of the building sectors and sort of supplement with what Cornelia has already spoken about, that a lot depends on the building that will come up, the appliances that will be manufactured and yet to be bought. Let me give a different angle to the entire situation. When a building is being constructed, the decision about installing a particular appliance which will consume the energy rests with the building manufacturers, so builder construction companies, or the designers, or the architects. The person who pays the energy bill when they are using the energy, occupying the building, they are never considered as part of the decision-making process. They're never involved in that decision-making process. So having energy efficiency considered at the design stage, at various stages of a building life cycle, would actually mean that you're helping out the user who's going to pay for that particular energy bill. That's also one of the reasons why it's equally important to look at building sector as a holistic sector, which will not only have impact and economic impact, but it will also have a social impact because of the air quality that you are able to provide within the homes that you're building, because of the kind of energy consumption that you're going to provide, as well as the kind of appliances that you're going to provide in those particular houses as well. So it's going to be an equally important, sector to sort of, deep dive into. But I'll be happy to sort of, I'll stop here and I'll be happy to sort of come back and go on some of the other sectors as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. And you also helped me a little bit with respecting the time, because you will have more difficulty in the second round because of me not doing well. Putting a lot of pressure on the panelists. So also for you, Mrs. Shabnam Basi from the RIA Council, a question, you would also have around 4 minutes. What roles do certification bodies like the GRIA Council and LEED have on the government of the built environments?
Panel discussion. I hope I'm audible. Right. So I would like to begin by saying that at one hand, the government regulations and policies, they provide the necessary push for sustainability. And at the same time, the rating organizations like GRIA and similar ratings provide the necessary pull. So where at one hand, the government is following a top-down approach, rating organizations, they follow a bottoms-up approach. So this is quite in tandem with the government policies. If I talk particularly about GRIA ratings, so we follow a holistic approach. So we not only look at the environmental aspects, but to a great extent, we look at the social as well as the financial aspects as well. So what we have done in GRIA ratings is that we have integrated all the existing policies and codes that are relevant to all the sectors, be it energy, water, waste. In fact, also talked about air pollution and water pollution. So having said that, that ensures not only environmental sustainability, but also looks at establishing resource efficiencies at various levels. So once a project gets registered under GRIHA, I think the first step itself is that we look at all the kind of clearances that a project needs to follow when they are looking at any kind of certifications, or in fact, they need to follow all the norms of the Government of India. So I think that being the first step at the design stage itself, we ensure that policies are implemented. So I think one very important aspect that I would like to mention here is that for any policy, for any regulations to be successful, it is very important to understand at what stage they are getting implemented. So I think what is missing right now in the implementation work or in the implementation strategies is that it is quite later in the life of the project that, we start looking at, meeting the compliances. So in the experience that we have had in GRIA Council, we feel that, if we start looking at implementation or looking at robust mechanisms at the design stage and at BOQ levels itself, then it will lead to real results and it will lead to real implementation. So I think that is something that we'll have to all look at critically, and rating organizations, and especially GRIHA, has a great responsibility in this regard. We have seen with our own efforts, and there are a number of case studies that you can see on our website as well, that mere by doing your basic things at the design stage and implementing all the codes and standards, we have been able to cut down on the resources by 30 to 40%. So this is an achievement, but at the same time, it's a great challenge because, the implementation frameworks need to be strengthened and ensured that it is implemented in the right spirit. So I'll leave it at that and I'll wait for the next question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you also for indeed focusing, and it was also an important message of IEA, the importance of actual implementation. And also I forgot to summarize sort of what you were saying. But the importance of also looking at when you do something, looking at the consumer and the user already in the design phase. So this was the first round of questions, and I, with pleasure, hand over to.
In fact, let me go to these questions, or shall we have a free discussion? I think I open the floor to the panelists to ask each other questions. I think, and then to the hall. So, the first, any questions or comments? And then to the hall. Please. Yeah. Need for transportation. Okay, we'll take some more questions and then any other. And I have a question to all three of you. Well, how do you see the roadmap and the timelines for the rollout of use of thermal energy for cooling, replacing air conditioners? Well, that seems to be the intention, I suppose. So how quickly can we get there, and what policy instruments would drive that change?
Maybe I can start. So I think Dr. Winfred Dam has shortly mentioned about in his remarks about the fact that along with GIZ, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has started a project on district cooling. And so the cooling along with thermal storage, district cooling along with thermal storage can play a crucial role in reducing the overall cooling demand and make it more sustainable. We also have the India Cooling Action Plan in place, wherein we have prepared a 20-year horizon from 2017-18 to 2037-38. And we're talking about reducing the cooling demand by 20 to 25%, reducing the refrigerant demand by 25 to 30%, and reducing the cooling energy requirements by 30 to 35%. And so district cooling is, of course, one of the tools that can help this. And I would like to announce that the BE along with GIZ, we are currently in the process of finalizing the code, district cooling code. Already a meeting has been held under the chairmanship of Honorable Minister of Power. And maybe in the next couple of months from now on, we should be in a position to come up with a district cooling guidelines to begin with. And then the next version will be the code, which will also have capture the kind of business models that should promote this. This is one thing. Second, of course, is the continuous efforts of course, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and rating agencies like GIA, CII and others to come up with to reduce the passive demand of buildings. So as far as the active cooling load of building is concerned, we are doing it very successfully through our appliance leveling program. And at the same time, through our commercial codes for energy conservation buildings and also for the residential building code that the Bureau has already developed, we are able to reduce the need for cooling in those buildings. And I will just end by saying that the amendment of the Energy Conservation Act, which was passed by the Parliament in the winter session, there we have also had the provision of now coming up with the Energy Conservation and Sustainable Building Code. So now the code, apart from energy efficiency, will also have green features added to it. So that will also, I think, in a great way, help us in limiting our cooling rise that we have been talking about. I will stop here.
Thank you for that question, sir. I think that's quite important, that considering that large stock of the buildings are yet to come up, and we will have to look at not only alternate cooling technologies, but I think we'll also all have to align ourselves to the government's agenda, and that is providing housing for all. So I think the time from now till I think next 30 to 40 years, we will have to look at various alternative cooling technologies. And not only that, we will have to, as Vijay just pointed out, that, building it the right way. So, incorporating the passive features into the buildings and also looking at alternative cooling technologies will become an integral part of the future construction, because I think the responsibility will be not only to look at resource efficient technologies, but also cost effective technologies. So I think if we keep these two factors in mind and look at how we are designing our projects, I think this will solve a lot of our problems. Thank you.
And before you answer, I'll just supplement the question. You see, there are the private developers who have to build. So what can government policy or regulation do to bring about a more rapid change?
I was actually going to come up with the same supplementary question as well, because I had more questions than answers to your question, but thank you so much. A couple of things. When we were also doing this particular study, we did look at ICAP, we did look at some of the other things that are available right now. One thing, in order to sort of accelerate the implementation of the existing goals and targets, Aditya did spoke about that, certain targets that we have. I think what's the clear roadmap? Defining a clear roadmap to achieve those targets, identifying specific milestones would be very helpful. The other thing is the building capacities of different stakeholders. For example, you identified the construction companies, developer companies. They do work with a lot of contractors. They do work with a lot of laborers. How do you sort of build their capacity? So when you're talking about energy efficiency in the cooling space or in any other space, we're able to ensure that the concept is distributed and understood well by each and every person who are part of that particular process. So I think having a coherent narrative in terms of how the roadmap looks at achieving those particular goals would be very important. Thanks.
What might its applicability be for a country like India?
Is related to that. I think there is a gap in terms of what public policies can do in terms of setting more stringency codes or standards. But the challenge we are facing is more on the implementation and compliance side. So, and also I feel that we sometimes treat new buildings and existing buildings differently, because we think that new buildings can be regulated through codes and existing buildings have to be regulated through retrofits and other things. So what are people's, I think, esteemed panel's thoughts that if the code itself starts to move towards outcome-based codes and the existing buildings move towards building performance standards, then it is going to actually move more towards a quantitative evaluation and compliance. And there are some examples, I think, where our countries are moving in that direction. But the bigger challenge is that how do you build the capacity of the country, urban and local bodies and municipal corporation to actually keep up with these more stringent requirements, because we are struggling with the first generation of code in India. So are there some financial tools where public investment can go there and private investment maybe go in retrofit? So just, I think we are trying to grapple with some of these issues. Thank you.
Let me use the opportunity and answer the other questions as well. So the first question was on how to reduce the demand for transportation. And the first answer would be, well, have the workplace next to your house. So there's one easy thing, but why? Yes, work from home is an idea too, but why reduce transport? Is this an issue? From my perspective, no, CO2 is the issue. So if free transport, or let's say cheap transport, helps the economy very significantly. And look at Germany, we're now introducing this 49 euro ticket. For 49 euro, you can travel pan Germany for the entire month without any other cost if you stick to local trains and local buses and transport. So this will start on May 1st, most likely, and will continue not as a COVID case. We did this 9 euro for 3 months. This will continue most likely forever from now on. So you have free transport kind of thing. The next answer would be, yes, go for public and shared transport. Then it's the mean to reduce CO2 emissions. The next question was on the building material. We had a nice project with B called E3. So I'm still surprised that Northern India is still on solid bricks. If you look into Southern India, aerated building material is quite common. Hollow bricks is quite common. So much cheaper, less using material, so much more energy efficient. But there we can analyze what are the market failures, what kind of regulation is required. B is trying to do something with an incentive as E3, but this understanding, knowledge sharing, and some regulatory things might need to kick in. Then on the question of when roadmap of stopping thermal for cooling, well, that's very easy. If you have renewables, where is the issue? Then the only issue, where do you get the renewables during nighttime? Then we have a happy discussion. My point is, coming back to the German experience, 2070 is not that far away. I always like to ask you, if you construct a new building, how long do you want to have this building last? Only 47 years? Or you expect that building will last 50 years and longer? Most likely you will have it last for longer. So is this already a net zero building? Or do you believe that in 2069 you change it to become net zero? So better think about that right away. Start with net zero buildings and all the other things along. And from a policy point of view, make roadmaps. Make roadmaps in each sector and monitor those. And then you have to, let's say, squeeze the changes required. And you will see that after 2-3 years, you might not be on track on that sector or the other sector, and you have to do even more efforts to get to the goal. Probably so much from my side.
Yes, sir. Can I ask questions, sir?
No, the question I have for Namita, because what learnings from the EU can help investment trusts incorporate energy efficiency principles in India?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ajay-ji. I think, look, if you look at InvITs, they have evolved to play an important role in the Indian infrastructure space. So these alternative funds are majorly catching up with long-term capital providers, especially private equity funds, pensions, sovereign wealth funds. And if you look at the volume, I mean, we are talking about the targets, right? India's updated NDCs would require over $2.6 trillion just up to 2030. So there's a volume of capital that needs to flow through. And when we are talking about buildings or other, power, energy transition, I mean, all of that would require capital. So if you look at currently, there are 19 SEBI registered InvITs in India, and leveraging now all their balance sheets with a renewed thrust on energy efficiency financing, I think that would not only bring in low cost of finance, but also harness socioeconomic, the side effects, or lower the side effects basically of, this whole low carbon transition. And I think that is becoming a growing priority for the changing profile of investors. So, to answer your question, I think there are 3 main lessons I would think that can be borrowed from the EU. One, speedily evolving with local policies for investment funds to operate in a synchronized manner in this entire sustainable finance landscape. I'm taking a leaf out of the EU's sustainable finance disclosure regulation. Something similar would improve transparency related to sustainable investment products, prevent greenwashing, and increase investor confidence on claims that are being made of sustainability. then at a fund or a corporation level, investment managers equipped with guiding principles for the purpose of preparing and drafting effective energy efficiency disclosures within the larger ESG disclosures, I think that would serve as a performance scorecard to accelerate financing to this sector. I think the second point is on how do we leverage financial resources and technical expertise to support infrastructure investments in line with the energy efficiency first principles. And there are good examples from other geographies that can be emulated. One being there is the EU Africa Infrastructure Trust Fund. What it did was it blended long-term loans from participating financiers with grant resources from donors and targeted investments in 4 different infrastructure sectors: water, energy, transport, and ICT. This is in sub-Saharan Africa. So far, they have raised over 12 billion euros and they've deployed 12 billion euros. And this is across 125 operations covering 940,000 households benefiting from electricity. I think developing these kind of instruments would propel the necessary investment pipeline and accelerate capital flows to the energy efficiency sector in line with the principle, and also contribute to India's energy security target. And my last point is just one last point on raising foreign debt for increasing returns by InvITs. This is something that's happening, and I think there is a lot of pressure from EU jurisdiction to embed ESG or the climate risk lens, right? So we need at a systemic level change, not just regulations, but within funds, within corporations, within those who are raising capital or using capital. I think they all need to come together to be able to, work around these areas. So I think these are some of the lessons I would think that we could borrow from other markets and streamline processes through public and private financing structures that will enable investments into the sector, as well as, in a way, power India's demand side as well as supply side measures. Thank you.
Would you like to find out?
Yes. Let me respond to a few of the questions that were raised. Just adding to what colleagues have said about reducing the need for transportation. It is also about managing the demand for transportation. So reducing transportation needs where they are not necessary, shifting to more active and alternative modes of transportation, increasing, enhancing, improving public transportation and shared mobility concepts, and also shifting the fuel sources to more efficient fuels, so electrification and alternative fuel sources. And also urban planning can have a lot to do with managing transport demand, managing congestion, which is also a big problem, air quality, etc. When we think about the EU energy efficiency regulations, I would also like to pose a question to the panel if we have enough space. So the EU directives usually give a common target and a timeline for target achievement. They set minimum requirements for each of the EU member states, and it is asked of EU member states to transpose the directives into their national legislation system. So is that a system that would be applicable and usable in the Indian context, looking at the central level and also the state level, of giving a central directive, a central direction of what needs to be achieved, and giving states the autonomy to decide of how they will achieve that? And this would include rollout of building codes, for instance, on the state level, and also empowering state authorities. Thank you.
Yeah,
You can
and yes, okay, thank you, sir. So maybe first of all, I will just try to respond to Cornelius' questions. So I think we have a classic example in the way we are implementing the energy conservation building code for commercial buildings, which is already in place now for the last 15 years. So we have come up with the code in 2007, and we have also had the updated version of the code in 2017. And so if we look at the provisions of the Energy Conservation Act, it clearly states that the Energy Conservation Board, or the central level, we are supposed to come up with a model code. And the states, they have to amend it according to their climatic conditions. So in India, we have these 5 climatic zones. So hot and humid, dry, composite, cold, and so if we look at the example that you have just given about EU, this is aware, and if I also look back to our cooperation in the other Indo-EU cooperation, so we have started this cooperation buildings, basically focusing because of this particular thing. So this is where I think we can learn a lot from you, how you have implemented in your member states. We also have this our states who are, we have amended the energy conservation building code based on their local, regional, and climatic conditions. And not only at the state level, but it has to be ultimately incorporated into the building bylaws, which is actually one step lower than the municipal levels. That is also started to happen now. So almost more than 300 urban local bodies is what we call in India, the municipalities. They've already adopted their energy conservation building code provisions into their bylaws, where actually the building code. So, for example, if I take the example of say Hyderabad Municipal Corporation, now that they have incorporated the provisions of energy conservation building code into their bylaws, and they have amended their bylaws accordingly. Any new buildings which will be constructed in the region which comes under the ambit of Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation, will have to also to comply with the energy conservation building code. So that process has already started. Maybe yes, for buildings we had this situation. For other sectors, we can also try and see how we can implement those. But I mean that is something which we have already done to a certain extent. So I think I need to conclude also, sir. So with your permission, sir, of course, we had a rich discussion, with a rich variety of panelists. So we heard from Ms. Namita about the lack of reliable data and the cost implications of new technologies. And so far the investment is concerned. Dr. Dam, of course, highlighted about the need for demand shift and then to have a more holistic approach. So moving from energy efficiency to the CO2 emission targets, and of course, as you also mentioned that now the amended Energy Conservation Act also empowers the B to formulate a scheme encapsulating the carbon markets. And as far as cooling is concerned, so district cooling along with thermal storage is one of the way forward to reduce the cooling demand. Of course, Cornelia highlighted about the IES research on energy efficiency, and so she mentioned about the fact that the energy efficiency related investments have gone up by 16%, and of course the energy intensity improvement is 2%, which is much higher than we have seen in the last 3 or 4 years, but still it is lower than what we expect to achieve. As far as energy transition is concerned, so she mentioned about the fact that energy efficiency should be front loaded, and of course the 2 basic pillars of energy transition could be decarbonization and electrification. So thank you for your inputs. And Chirag also mentioned about looking at the building sector more holistically, and Sabna mentioned about that how the rating of buildings have shown that taking appropriate measures at the design stage, which really helps us in reducing the energy demand when the building is in the operational stage. So I think all these inputs, and of course we have got a good questions from the audience as well regarding the need to reduce transportation, utilizing the experience of EU, and then what are the implementation issues, particularly in case of buildings. So I think all these questions, all these things will help us in better formulating our report, which we are currently preparing with you under as part of the CECP project. And I hope that we will take into consideration all the recommendations that we got from this rich panel discussion and the rich audience that we have. So thank you very much for all your inputs. We'll try to incorporate the findings in our report, and we'll share with you as when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arijit Sen Gupta. colleagues, we come to an end of 90 minutes of exciting, engaging discussions. On behalf of the EU team and the entire TERI family, I thank all of you for your presence today. Uh, thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Ajay Shankar sir, for steering the conversation with a powerful and diverse panel. As always, it has been our absolute pleasure to have you as chairpersons. We are very proud to actually host a diverse panel today. Spanning across science, policy, technology, finance, and importantly the demand side perspectives. Once again, thank you, Mr. Arijit Sen Gupta, Dr. Cornelia, Dr. Dam, Ms. Sabnam Vassi, Chirag, and of course, Namita, Ms. Namita Vikas, who has joined us online. Your thoughts keep us, upbeat and push ourselves to continue to be relevant and contemporary. I'm sure this session will provide mighty inputs for the report that Edwin and Chirag are steering. I would also extend our thanks to all the participants who have joined the session both inside the room, and we have a handful who have also joined online. And this is also a diverse group. There are global think tanks, sectoral associations. We have some global think tanks, the industry, and of course, some of the architects and the sectoral experts in the audience. Uh, um, Thank you all the participants for asking interesting, engaging questions, and we sincerely regret we could not take more questions, but of course we can take this during the course of the remaining of the summit. Last, I'd like to thank all the colleagues who have actually put together this session, and many a times they're actually invisible and at the back end. To begin with, of course, Mr. Edwin Koke from the EU team, who has been constantly he has been with us to curate this entire session. Chirag and Nidhin from the PwC team. Mr. Giri Sethi, Ria, Saurabh, Shrija, and Anuradha from the TEDI team. And of course, another set of colleagues who continue to be invisible, who are managing the event curation, the logistics, the IT support, the communications, which has enabled all of us to be here today. Thank you for your presence today. We hope you enjoyed the session just like ourselves, how we enjoyed hosting you. Thank you. Bye bye. And there are some next steps for the remaining of your participation in the summit.
Thank you everyone for making it out here in person, and those who've joined virtually. We are very grateful. Refreshments will be served outside the hall. And thank you so much for joining in. The session has now come to an end. Thank you.